In Acumatica 2021 R2, they've added some functionality to the license monitoring console screen. Now before we look at what's new, let's take a look at license monitoring and how Acumatica handles their licensing. Acumatica is somewhat unique in that they don't license per user, even though you can see down here, since I'm in a demo environment, there is a 2 concurrent user limitation. That's because I have no license, which is pretty neat, I think, as anyone can download and install Acumatica. But if you're using a production version, you're going to be limited by transactions, not users. Now, it's got some advantages. One, you can have as many people as you want running reports, and they're not affecting your license limitations. But one of the downsides, I think, is that it's more complicated than it is to just count users. So that's where the license monitoring console screen comes in, which we can find up here. If I can type it correctly. So license monitoring console. And you can see here, since I'm in a demo environment, I don't have a valid license. But it is still keeping track of my transactions. And there's 2 components to the license, and this is where, in my opinion, it starts to get kind of complicated. You have to spend some time understanding it. First, there's a monthly number of commercial transactions. Then there's a monthly number of ERP transactions. There's also a database storage limit, but let's just focus on these 2 things. So that's what your actual license limitation is. There are some recommended maximums at a daily level, but as far as I understand it, legally the thing that matters are these 2 buckets right here. So what's the difference between a commercial transaction and an ERP transaction? Well, in general, the commercial transactions are a smaller set of transactions. ERP transactions is a broader set of transactions. And you can see some details on this using the help on this screen, looking at the license monitoring console. And if you scroll down here, this to me is the most useful, this little icon with the blue section. First, it points out that commercial transactions are a subset of ERP transactions. So I think of that as like a circle within a circle. Then here's the critical part. It gives you a list of what is defined as a commercial transaction. So this is the list that includes what's in commercial transactions. One thing that I think is important to note here is that it does appear to be documents, not document lines. So, you could maybe get around some license limitations by trying to take more lines on a single sales order, for example, or do more lines on an individual shipment to reduce your total document count, even though you'd still be processing the same number of lines. Now, I was disappointed when I read this because it says that it does count whether you create or update one of those transactions. However, I think this is incorrect because, as you'll see when we look at the license monitoring console, it does appear to only be based off of created transactions in a given month. Then once a monthly ERP transaction, well, it's all of this stuff plus everything else in Acumatica. Basically, whenever you click save on a form, even custom stuff, which we'll take a look at. Now, when it comes to commercial transactions, it's important to note that it doesn't add all these together. It takes whatever the largest bucket is, if you will. So let's see how that works. If we come back to the license monitoring console, we can look at our statistics. Now you can see in parentheses, you would see a percentage of your license limit, but I don't have a license in my demo environment, but it is still showing me the number of commercial transactions. So if we look at this one, for example, it's telling me that in December, I've got 3 commercial transactions. In November, I've got 6 commercial transactions. So on the top, it's by month. On the bottom, it's by day. So if I want to see which days actually had commercial transactions, let's sort descending. And maybe let's drag this up a little bit, or at least go to the next page. You can see the next page is all zeros. So there's only 3 days that had commercial transactions. And when I read this help article, it kind of makes it seem that it's counting it by day. Let's see, a max counts the number of commercial transactions, takes a max among all types for each day. And you can see that it does do that by day. So if I look in here, this says 5. and it looks like I've only got one type of transaction. These are accounts receivable invoices. If I click in here, I've got one sales order on this day, and then on this day I've got one accounts receivable invoice. Now it doesn't look though like it totals this up. It doesn't do 5 plus 1 plus 1. That would be 7, but it's only giving me a count of 6. So what it does appear to be doing, as far as I can tell, is it's totaling up by month and taking the maximum bucket, which would be invoices. This 5 invoices plus this 1 invoice is the 6 invoices. Here's where you can see why it gets complicated. This is me off of a limited data set trying to see what it's doing now. You can see it's not quite doing what the help says, at least as far as I can tell. And the monthly is really what matters, because back here, this is the thing that has teeth. This is what your contract is saying. You're limited to a monthly number of commercial and ERP transactions. Now, your commercial number is going to be significantly lower than your ERP transaction number. And what's interesting about them, though, taking the maximum of the categories, is that you might have one month, you might have a bunch of sales orders, and maybe you've got 2,000 sales orders one month, and then the next month you might only have 1,500 sales orders, but now you're shipping a lot of the sales orders from the previous month, so you might have 2,500 shipments. Well, if this was the largest bucket type of transaction in one month, those 2,000 sales orders maybe would get counted in November, for example. And then maybe you're doing a lot of shipping in December, so you might have 2,500 shipments. If that's the highest number of all the transaction types, then your shipments would get counted as the commercial transactions in December. So that's where you can see it kind of gets complicated, but it makes it interesting. And I can see there being advantages and disadvantages, especially with businesses that have a seasonality to them. So that's the commercial transactions. But what about the ERP transactions? So we already saw when we click in here, we can see the different document types, their counts. It's taking the largest document type. Then you can also flip over here though to ERP transactions. We could get the same thing by clicking here and going straight into ERP transactions. It gives us the same thing. Now, I actually want to look at December, so let's go back in. You'll see I have a really high ERP transaction count for December. And here's where, let's look at the help again. It's telling us that it happens every time a user clicks save on an ERP form. Now, actually, there is one other thing I want to talk about on commercial before we go there. Let me go back again. Sorry about that. Let's go take a look at this 3. So for December, it's telling me I have 3 invoices that count against my commercial transaction count. If I look though on the ERP side, it's telling me I have 9 invoices. So here's why I think that the language in the help is not correct, at least in terms of what I'm seeing. Where it seems like the language in the help is saying that, where to go down here, when you either create or update. It seems to me that it's only counting it when you create it, and I'll show you why. So if we look here, I've got 9 invoices and memos. If I go into the document details, and here finally at this point is where we get to the new feature in 2021 R2. This document details tab is new in 2021 R2. And if you look down here, this is giving me a lot of detail. It's giving me the individual record saves. So if I look at this screen ID, this is my invoices. Let's just filter on this screen ID. And here's where we get our 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. This is the 9 that was appearing on the previous screen. But then if we look further, if I click through these, you'll see I've got invoice 100, I've got invoice 101, 102, 103, and the rest of these are the same invoices. There's 101 again, 100 again, 100 a few times. So there's really only 4 invoices, 100, 101, 102, and 103. So there's only 4 invoices involved, but if we look back on my commercial transaction account, I'm only counting 3, not 4. And so you can't quite see this in the data now. You'll just have to trust me on this. I did walk through this. If we look at 103, so what I did is I created that one and I backdated it to November 29th. But if you look up here on the audit history, you can see that it was actually created in December, not in November. So if I go cancel this, this is getting counted against my December commercial transactions. However, if I go into down here, number 100, I did make some saves on 100 in December, but if I open this up and I look at the created date, which seems to be what it's counting, this actually happened in November. So I don't believe that this one is getting counted. So I think that's why only 101, 102, and 103, even though 103 was backdated, still gets counted based on that create date. Those 3 invoices are counted in December, which is why we wound up with a commercial transaction account of 3 invoices. So commercial transactions, stuff that's created this month, that's in that subset right here. ERP transactions, everything both created and modified, so that the 9 invoice counts, even though invoice 100, so there's 9 of these, even though invoice 100 was listed multiple times here down on the bottom, each save is getting counted against my ERP transaction count. And a save includes both a create and an update. You can actually see that. Well, you can't really see it. You'll just have to trust me on it. Number 101, this record is when I first created it. Let's see, right there. And then I did a change to it. So they both appear as a save, even though that was a create and that was an update. Now, one thing that's interesting is that also deletes get counted here. And that's actually why my document count is so high. You'll see the 11,000. I had 11,000 records dumped into a custom area, and I wanted to clear them out because it was sensitive data, and all of that got counted against my ERP count, which is why my transaction count is so high. So deletes also count, and then this is a custom area, so custom stuff also counts, which is why this is saying this part seems to be correct. The user clicks save on any form, even if you're doing mass processing. So in this case, I ran this through an import scenario, but the license monitoring still picked it up. It still figured out that I was modifying a record. And I think API work, if you're pushing stuff in through APIs or making modifications, that would get picked up as well. So let's go ahead and see that part in action. If we come back here, right now that custom area is my highest bucket. So it's showing me the 11106, and it's actually done on this screen, which is here. And right now this is empty. So if I go ahead and put in a new one, actually let's put in 2 records. 2 records. No, it went out. Let's do 3. So I just created 3 new records. If I come back to my license monitoring console, I was at 11106. When I refresh, I'm now only at 11108. So I'm not sure what happened there. Let's add one more. $11,109. So my guess on what happened is one of these must have been a test transaction that I was using earlier, and I must have deleted it, and then when I went and created it again, it didn't get counted again. That's my guess on what happened there. But let's look at a change. So now let's say I go in and make a change to a record number 4. Save that. I was at 11109. Let's refresh. I'm now at 11110. So a create gets counted, a change gets counted, and here's where you can see a delete also gets counted. So 11110, 11111. So creates, changes, deletes all get counted on ERP transactions, and custom stuff, including this custom screen here, those records also get counted against your ERP transaction count. So as you can see, Acumatica is unique, I think, in their licensing, in that it's based on transaction. It can be kind of complicated, but they are improving the visibility. And in 2021 R2, this document details tab is new, so you can click in and see the individual transactions that were affected and really dig into the details to understand why the commercial transaction and ERP transaction counts are what they are.